Welcome back to the deep dive. Today, we are, we are doing something a little dangerous.
I think so, yes.
We are going to take a sledgehammer to one of the most comforting, pastoral, and just enduring images in all of Western history.
It's an image everyone knows, even if you've never stepped foot in a church.
Exactly. You know the picture.
Yeah.
You have seen it in Sunday school. You've seen it in all that Renaissance art. You have probably heard it in, I don't know, a dozen sermons.
It is the foundational image of the 12 apostles.
Right. And the vibe is always the same. 12 simple, rustic men, maybe a little bumbling. They have dirt under their fingernails. They probably smell like fish. And they are, for the most part, essentially clueless.
Yeah, the narrative is that they just stumbled into this massive spiritual revolution.
They just got swept up by a charismatic leader and sort of surfed this wave of miracles despite being, let's be honest, completely out of their depth.
The holy ignorance trope. It is a classic. It's this idea that God chooses the foolish to shame the wise. And, I mean, while there is a lot of theological truth to the idea of humility, historically, this specific image of the apostles might be a total fabrication.
A fabrication. That is a strong way to start.
Well, it's a malevolent legend, to quote one of the researchers in our stack today.
A malevolent legend. Wow.
Yeah, the sources we are looking at, and we are going deep here, into New Testament philology, the Babylonian Talmud, the Dead Sea Scrolls from Qumran, they all suggest a completely different reality.
Okay, so what reality is that?
They argue that these men were actually the cream of Israel.
The cream of Israel, so not bumbling peasants.
Far from it. We are talking about men who were highly trained in halakha, which is, complex Jewish law. These were men operating with a level of legal sophistication that absolutely terrified the ruling elite.
So the whole thesis we're exploring is that this idea of their ignorance was actually a myth, a story constructed by their enemies to discredit them.
Precisely. And here is the real twist in the story we are going to unpack.
Okay.
The real ignoramuses, the truly uneducated ones in the story, were the very people sitting on the high thrones in Jerusalem judging them.
I love a good table turn. So we are essentially investigating a 2,000-year-old smear campaign.
That's exactly what it is. And to do that, you have to look at the motives, you have to dig into the language, and you really have to understand the legal structures of the first century.
Okay, let's unpack this, because this rewrites the whole script. I mean, where do we even begin? I guess we have to go to the scene of the crime, right? The source of this whole ignorant fisherman idea.
We do. We have to start with the smoking gun verse. It is in the book of Acts, chapter 4, verse 13. This is the single verse that has been used for centuries to prove that Peter and John were, uneducated.
Can you set the scene for us? What is actually happening in this moment in Acts 4?
Okay, so you have to picture this. It's a high-stakes courtroom drama. Peter and John have just healed a man who couldn't walk right at the temple gate. This causes a massive scene, a huge commotion.
Right, a crowd gathers.
A huge crowd. So they're arrested. They get dragged before the Sanhedrin. Now, you have to understand who is in this room. This isn't your local magistrate. This is the Supreme Court of Judea.
So we're talking about the absolute top brass.
The absolute elite of the elite. You have got the high priests, the rulers, the elders, the scribes. Everyone who's anyone is in that room.
The Ivy League of the first century.
Exactly. The intellectual and political aristocracy. And Peter stands up. He doesn't beg for mercy. He doesn't stammer. He delivers what is essentially a closing argument that is so piercing, so legally and scripturally sound, that the entire room just goes silent.
And that's what brings us to verse 13.
That's the moment.
Okay, I have the text right here. It says, "Now when they saw the boldness of Peter and John and perceived that they were uneducated and common men, they were astonished."
Uneducated and common. And those are the key words. The Greek words are agrammatoi and idiotai.
And that is usually where the case closes, right?
Yeah.
The Bible says they were uneducated, so end of story. They were uneducated.
That's the simple reading. But you're saying we are completely mistranslating this, or at least misinterpreting it.
We are misinterpreting the cultural signal massively. We need to strip away 2 millennia of theological bias and just look at the Greek as a first century listener would have heard it. Let's take that first word. Agrammatoi. Agrammatoi. It sounds like grammar or agrammatical, like lacking grammar.
And that's the root. Literally, it means without letters.
Which to my ears sounds like illiterate.
To a modern ear, absolutely. If I tell you someone is without letters, you immediately assume they can't read or write. But in the Jewish context of the first century, that's It's just highly unlikely.
Why?
There was a massive societal pressure for basic literacy to study Torah. It was a religious obligation. Almost every Jewish male would have had at least some basic literacy in Hebrew.
Okay, so if it doesn't mean illiterate, what does a grammatoi mean in this specific high-stakes context?
It means lacking paideia.
Paideia. I don't know that word. What is that?
Think of it as formal, elite Greek rhetorical training. It means they hadn't gone to the Ivy League schools of Athens or Alexandria, and more importantly, it means they hadn't attended the specific aristocratic scribal schools of Jerusalem where the high priests and the elite sent their sons.
Ah, okay. So it is not a statement about their intelligence or their basic ability to read.
Not at all.
It is a statement about their pedigree, their credentials.
That is a perfect way to put it. It's like a Harvard law professor looking at a brilliant self-taught engineer and calling him uneducated just because he didn't learn the specific handshake or the specific style of debate that they use in the ivory tower.
So it's pure classism.
It's pure classism. They are saying, these men do not have our diplomas, they are not from our club. And then there is the second word, which is maybe even more misunderstood, idiotai.
Idiotai. Now that one sounds suspiciously like, well, idiots.
It does, but this is a classic false friend. Don't fall for it. In ancient Greek, an idiots was simply a private person.
A private person.
A civilian. It was the term for someone who didn't hold a public office. It is the direct opposite of a magistrate or a politician or a priest.
So like a layman.
Exactly, a layman. Or profane, but not in the sense of being blasphemous. Profane in the original Latin sense of profanum, outside the temple. They're outsiders to the specific privileged circle of the priesthood.
So when the Sanhedrin called them idiotai, they weren't saying these men are stupid.
No.
They were saying these men are unauthorized, they don't hold a seat on our council, they aren't part of the priestly guild. It is jurisdictional complaint, not an intellectual one.
Exactly. It's about status, not intellect.
But then the text says they were astonished. They were shocked. If I see a random guy on the street, I am not astonished that he's a civilian. Why the shock?
Now that is the key. The shock was the discrepancy. It was the paradox of what they were seeing versus what they were expecting.
What do you mean?
They were astonished by their parrhesia.
Parrhesia. And that means boldness, right?
It means boldness, yes, but it's more than that. It's frankness, freedom of speech. In the Greek democratic tradition, parrhesia was a civil right. It was the freedom to speak openly and truthfully in the public assembly. It implied high status, courage, and transparency. Slaves didn't have parrhesia. Only free, high-status citizens did.
Okay, so here's the paradox. You have these outsiders, these idiotai, these private citizens who are supposed to be completely cowed by the presence of the high priest.
They should be shaking in their boots.
But instead, they are speaking with the command and the rhetorical confidence of a seasoned senator.
Exactly right. The authorities are looking at them and they're thinking, wait a minute, you don't have the credentials. You are not from our families. You haven't been trained in our specific academy. So how on earth are you dismantling our arguments with this level of confidence and legal precision?
It is a total Goodwill Hunting moment.
Yeah.
The janitor's at the blackboard, and he's solving the impossible math problem.
It is, and that leads to the crucial realization in the second half of the verse. It says, they recognized that they had been with Jesus. That's when it clicks for them. They realized the source of this unauthorized expertise. The shock wasn't that these men were stupid. The shock was that these men, who socially should have been silent and deferential, were performing at a level that rivaled and maybe even surpassed the Sanhedrin itself.
Okay, this is a huge reframing. So if the apostles weren't the ignorant ones, if they were just outsiders to a corrupt system, then we have to flip the script and look at the other side of that courtroom.
At the judges themselves.
The judges. Who were these guys really? Because our outline calls them the real ignoramuses. And that seems, I don't know, a bit aggressive.
It might seem aggressive, but historically it's quite accurate. We have to look at the specific families holding power in Jerusalem at that exact time. We are not talking about some abstract priesthood. We're talking about really 4 dominant families.
Like dynasties.
Exactly. You have the house of Hanach, or Annas, as he is often called in the New Testament. You have the house of Boethus, the house of Cathros, and the house of Phoebe.
These are the names that pop up all over the Gospels. They're sort of the perennial bad guys.
They are the establishment, but here's the thing you won't hear in most sermons. The Jewish sources, specifically the Talmud, absolutely despise these families.
They despise them. Why? I mean, I would assume it was because they collaborated with Rome, but is it more than that?
It's much deeper. The Talmud doesn't really care that much about their role in the Jesus story. That's not its focus. It despises them because they were seen as corrupt, violent, and illegitimate. Look at the tractate Pesachim, page 57a in the Talmud. It actually records a curse against these priestly
A
families.
curse in the Talmud. What does it say?
It is essentially a lament, a public outcry. It says, "Woe is me because of the house of Hanan. Woe is me because of their whispers."
There are whispers. What does that mean?
It's referring to their calumnies, their secret plottings, and backroom deals. Then it continues. "Woe is me because of the house of Cathros. Woe is me because of their pens."
They're pens, as in writing pens.
Yes. The commentary explains it refers to their misuse of the scribal office to falsify records or write unjust decrees, probably to steal money or land. And then the Talmud delivers the killing blow.
Okay.
It says, "For they are high priests, and their sons are treasurers, and their sons-in-law are trustees, and their servants beat the people with clubs."
Wait, hang on. Beat the people with clubs. This sounds like organized crime, not a religious order.
It effectively was a mafia. You have to remember, these families weren't the legitimate Hasmonean line of priests that had ruled for generations. They were imported. Herod the Great, who was himself an Idumean puppet of Rome, not seen as a fully legitimate Jewish king by many, he installed these families specifically to break the old power structures and ensure loyalty to him and to Rome.
So they were political appointees through and through.
Exactly. Their power came from Rome and Herod, not from piety, not from deep knowledge of Torah. They were wealthy, they were collaborators, and yes, they were violent.
So when we get back to this charge of ignorance, are you saying these high priests didn't actually know the law? That seems like a stretch.
In a deep spiritual and halakhic sense, yes. The sources strongly suggest that these priests were often uneducated in the true halakha, the nuanced, debated Jewish law, as it was being discussed by the great Pharisaic sages.
So they knew the rituals, but not the substance.
They were politicians, they knew how to run the temple business, which was incredibly lucrative, but they were disconnected from the traditions of Hillel and Shammai, the great schools of thought. The Talmud basically views them as Sealtroni charlatans, frauds.
So when Peter and John stand before them, it is not just fishermen versus scholars.
No.
It is more like true Torah students versus corrupt politicians who happen to be wearing priestly robes.
That is the dynamic our source material argues for, precisely. The apostles represented a return to an authentic, living tradition, while the high priests were just this hollow shell of authority.
There's a fascinating name that pops up in this whole web of priestly families. Teophilo, or as it's usually translated, Theophilus.
Ah, yes. And this connects us straight back to the author of Acts itself, to the Gospel of Luke.
Right, because Luke and Acts are both dedicated to this Theophilus. We usually hear that name just means lover of God, and it's a generic dedication to any Christian reading the book. But the research suggests he was a real specific person.
There is a very strong scholarly convergence on this now. The evidence points to the Theophilus addressed in Luke and Acts being Teophilo ben Ananus, and he was the high priest of Israel from 37 to 41 AD.
The son of Annas, so he was part of the house of Hanan, the very same mafia family we were just talking about.
The very same. He was Annas' son and Caiaphas' brother-in-law, right at the center of the web.
So why on earth would Luke dedicate his gospel and the book of Acts to the head of the enemy family? That seems counterintuitive.
Think of it as a legal brief or an appeal. Luke addresses him with the honorific Cratiste Most Excellent. That is a formal title for high-ranking Roman and Jewish officials. Luke is presenting the meticulously researched evidence of the life of Jesus and the Acts of the Apostles directly to the high priest.
So he's not just telling a story.
He's making a case, perhaps to prove that this new movement is the true fulfillment of the promises to Israel, not a rebellion against it. He is, in a sense, trying to educate the judge.
Is there any physical, archaeological proof connecting this family to the early Christian movement?
There is an incredible clue from archaeology. An ossuary, a stone bone box, was discovered, and it was inscribed with the name Joanna, granddaughter of Teophilo, high priest.
Wait a minute. Joanna's in the gospel. She's one of the named women.
She is. Joanna appears in Luke chapter 8 and again in Luke chapter 24. She is named as one of the women who supported Jesus and his disciples financially out of her own means, and she was one of the first witnesses at the empty tomb.
So if this is the same family, it implies that within this corrupt high priestly clan, there were cracks, there were believers. Someone from the high priest's own family was funding this movement.
It is wild when you think about it. It makes the whole story so much more grounded in the real messy politics of the time. It implies that even within the House of Hannon, the message was penetrating.
It adds incredible stakes to the text. It turns the gospel from a simple storybook into a dossier being presented to a potentially hostile but maybe conflicted authority.
Exactly.
Okay, so we have established that the accusers were likely corrupt and that the ignorance of the apostles was a myth about their pedigree, not their intellect. But let's really dig into who the apostles actually were. We need to redefine their job title.
We do. We need to stop thinking of them as missionaries in the modern sense of the word, and we need to start thinking of them as legal agents.
We call them apostles, which is a Greek word, apostolos. It just means one who is sent.
Right, but that's a bit generic. To understand their actual function, we have to look at the Hebrew legal term that lies behind it, shaliah. The plural is shlichim.
Shalia. Okay, break that down for us from a legal perspective. What is a shalia?
A shaliah is an agent. But, and this is crucial, not just a messenger boy, in Jewish law there is a golden rule of agency, a principle that underpins everything. Shalucha shaliah adam kamohu.
A man's agent is like the man himself.
Precisely. It means the agent is a legal extension of the person who sent them. If I appoint you as my shaliah to go and contract a marriage for me, which was a thing you could do in ancient Jewish law, the moment you sign that contract, I am married. I don't have to be there.
Wow.
If I appoint you to buy a specific plot of land, that land becomes mine the moment you complete the transaction. The agent creates legal facts that are binding upon the sender.
So when Jesus appoints the 12 as apostles, as his shlichim, he isn't just saying, go tell people about me.
He is granting them power of attorney.
He is creating a legal proxy. They are his stand-ins. When they speak with authority, legally, it is as if Jesus himself is speaking.
That's the claim. But there is a catch in the law, isn't there? This kind of human agency, it usually expires.
Yes, of course. In the Talmud, agency automatically expires if the sender dies. It's logical. And even if they don't die, the agency usually has a time limit, often 30 days for certain tasks, but Jesus died on the cross. So theoretically, their agency, their shlichut, should have ended right there.
That is where the resurrection changes everything, legally speaking. The entire premise of the apostolic claim is that the mandator, the one who sent them, Jesus is alive. He's not dead. And he explicitly tells them, I am with you always to the end of the age.
So he takes a temporary legal contract and transforms it into a perpetual mandate.
An agency, a shlichut, that never expires. And this is what validates their authority to act as a beit din rabbinic court.
A court. We usually think of them as preachers, maybe teachers, but not as judges.
But the terminology used in the Gospels gives it away. Think about the language of binding and loosing.
Oh yeah, I have heard that. It's often used in like spiritual warfare context. I bind this spirit, that kind of thing.
That is a much later charismatic reinterpretation. In the first century Jewish context, binding, which is asar in Hebrew, and loosing, hitter, were technical legal terms used by rabbis every single day.
Really? What do they mean?
To bind something meant to declare an action forbidden by the law. To loose something meant to declare it permitted. It was the core function of a rabbinic judge to interpret the Torah for new situations.
So when Jesus gives the apostles the keys to the kingdom and the power to bind and loose, he is giving them supreme judicial authority. He's empowering them to interpret the Torah for this new community.
Exactly. He is making them the Supreme Court of the New Covenant. They're the ones who get to decide the halakha, the proper walk or way of life for his followers.
And we actually see them doing this, don't we?
We do. The perfect example is in Acts chapter 15 at the Council of Jerusalem.
That is the big debate about whether Gentile converts need to be circumcised to be saved.
Right. And notice what happens there. They don't just get together and pray and share their feelings. It is a formal proceeding. They debate evidence. They hear testimony from Paul and Barnabas. Peter gives a speech. And then James, the head of the Jerusalem church, stands up and issues a decree.
A ruling.
A binding legal ruling. The Greek word used is related to dogmata, or in Hebrew, a gezerah. He decides that no, Gentiles do not need circumcision, but they do have to follow specific laws, the laws of Noah, regarding idolatry and sexual immorality. That was a legislative act.
That's something only a shaliah with full authority could do.
Correct. Simple fishermen don't issue gezerah. Legal agents who believe their mandator is the risen Messiah do.
This brings us to the actual content of their arguments and Jesus's arguments as well. Because there is this pervasive idea that Jesus and the apostles were sort of spiritual anarchists.
Yeah, that they just wanted to break the rules.
Right, the love over law idea, that the law was this old, crusty thing, and Jesus came to just get rid of it.
And that's another massive misconception that our sources really push back against. The argument is that Jesus and the apostles never broke the law, ever. They debated it. And they debated it at an extremely high technical level.
Okay, give us a case study. What about the Sabbath? That was a huge point of contention.
It was. Take the famous incident of the disciples plucking grain on the Sabbath. The Pharisees accuse them of working, of harvesting. Now, usually this is preached as Jesus saying, the Sabbath doesn't matter, people's hunger matters more.
Right. The Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath. That's the famous line.
But look at how he argues that point. He doesn't just dismiss them. He engages them on their own legal turf. First, he cites the precedent of David eating the showbread in the temple when he was hungry, which was technically only for priests.
So he's using a scriptural precedent, a legal argument from history.
Exactly. Then he appeals to the principle of pikuach nefesh, the foundational idea in Jewish law that saving a human life overrides almost any other commandment, including the Sabbath. He then uses a classic hermeneutic rule called kal vachomer.
Kal vachomer. I have heard that before. That is the light and heavy argument, isn't it?
Yes, the argument a fortiori. If this is true for a minor case, how much more so is it true for a major case? He argues that if the priest can work in the temple on the Sabbath and be guiltless, how much more can his disciples, in the presence of one greater than the temple, be guiltless?
That is not a rejection of the system. That is outmaneuvering them from within their own legal framework.
It's a brilliant piece of rabbinic debate. What about the hand-washing controversy?
Mark chapter 7, that one always seemed to be just about basic hygiene.
No, it had nothing to do with hygiene. It was a debate about the tradition of the elders, the oral law, and how far the boundaries of ritual purity should extend.
What do you mean?
Certain Pharisaic groups, and especially the priesthood, wanted to extend the laws of priestly purity, which were meant for service in the temple, to everyday meals for all people. Jesus challenges the very source of their authority to make such a ruling. It is a debate on jurisdiction and the limits of tradition.
And the Corban vow, that one is really confusing in the text.
It is sophisticated, but it makes perfect sense in a legal context. There was a practice, a loophole really, where a man could dedicate his property to the temple by declaring it Corban.
Corban meaning a gift to God.
Right. And by doing so, he could then claim he couldn't use that money or property to support his aging parents because it was tied up with God.
A pious-sounding excuse to avoid helping mom and dad.
Exactly. And Jesus attacks this mercilessly. But look at how he does it. He weighs two clear commandments from the Torah against each other. The obligation to keep a vow, found in the book of Numbers, versus the commandment to honor your father and mother, one of the 10 commandments.
And he rules that the commandment to honor your parents carries more weight. It takes precedence.
Which is a classic rabbinic operation, establishing a hierarchy of principles, determining precedence between conflicting laws. An ignorant peasant wouldn't even know how to begin to formulate that kind of argument. Jesus and the apostles argue like Talmud Chacham, disciples of a sage. They use the midat, the established rules of interpretation.
It really changes how you read the Gospels. It stops being a rejection of Judaism and starts being a masterclass in it.
It is an internal struggle for the soul of the Torah.
Okay, now let's talk numbers. The number 12. We all know there were 12 apostles. And we usually think, okay, 12 tribes of Israel. It is a nice symbolic nod. It's poetic.
It is poetic, but our deep dive suggests it is way more institutional than that. It's structural.
And for this, we have to go to the desert. We have to look at the Dead Sea Scrolls, the Qumran community.
The Essenes, yes. These were the guys living out in the desert, this monastic, priestly community, waiting for the end of the world, the sons of light.
So what do their documents tell us about the number 12?
When we look at their founding documents, their community charters, like the Rule of the Community, which is codenamed 1QS, we find something absolutely startling. Their Supreme Community Council required a very specific number of members.
And that number was?
Exactly 12 men and 3 priests.
12 plus 3, a council of 15.
And it doesn't stop there. The War Scroll, 1QM, which describes the final apocalyptic battle, mentions 12 chiefs to serve in perpetuity. The Temple Scroll, 11Q19, says that the ideal king of Israel must have a council of 12 princes, 12 priests, and 12 Levites.
So the number 12 wasn't just some poetic, sentimental number. It was a government quorum. It was an institutional blueprint.
It was the necessary structure for what they believed was the true Israel. You have to remember the Qumran community believed the current priesthood in Jerusalem was corrupt and illegitimate.
Just like Jesus and his followers did.
Right. They saw the Jerusalem establishment as hopelessly compromised, so they went out into the desert to set up a government in exile, a shadow cabinet, waiting for God to restore them. And that cabinet, to be legitimate in their eyes, had to have 12 leaders to represent the restored 12 tribes.
So when Jesus calls 12 disciples to follow him, he is effectively declaring a new government.
He is declaring the restoration of Israel. He is signaling to everyone who has eyes to see that the new government of Israel is forming now, right here, around him. But notice the crucial difference in strategy. Qumran was intensely isolationist. They hid in the caves. They were all about purity and separation. It was sons of light versus everyone else, the sons of darkness.
In Jesus.
He adopts the same structure, the 12, which shows he's playing the same game, but he completely flips the exclusivity. He sends his 12 out into the world. His new Israel isn't hiding in the desert. It is infiltrating the towns and villages.
There's a note here in the research about a 15-member hypothesis. What is that all about?
It is a bit speculative, but it's fascinating. If Jesus was following that Qumran model of 12 laymen plus 3 priests to form a leadership corps of 15, some scholars start looking for that pattern.
And do they find it?
Well, you have the inner circle, Peter, James, and John. They often appear as a special trio within the 12.
The ones who go up the mountain at the Transfiguration. The ones in the Garden of Gethsemane.
Right. And then you have the constant confusion of names in the lists of the 12. Is Nathanael the same person as Bartholomew? Is Thaddeus the same as Judas, son of James? Some wonder if the total leadership group might have subtly mirrored that 15-member council structure found at Qumran with a core of 12 and an inner circle of 3. We can't prove it, but it shows just how deeply embedded this movement was in the sectarian debates of the time.
It wasn't random. Every move was a precise counter-narrative to the Essenes on one side and the Pharisees on the other.
Absolutely. He was carrying out a third way.
But the power of the number 12 goes even deeper than politics. It seems to get into the mystical, almost cosmic fabric of the universe, at least according to the Talmud.
It does. The Talmud and the Mishnah, which are the foundational texts of Rabbinic Judaism, treat the number 12 as a building block of reality.
Let's talk about the oil story. That one really blew my mind when I read it in the prep.
Okay, this is from the Talmudic tractate Kerito, page 5b. It discusses the holy anointing oil that Moses prepared in the wilderness. The tradition recorded in the Talmud says Moses made just 12 logs of oil. A log is a liquid measure, not a huge amount.
12 logs. That doesn't sound like enough to last very long.
Not at all. But the miracle, according to the Talmud, is that this finite amount of oil lasted for all generations. It was used to anoint Aaron and all the subsequent high priests, the tabernacle, and all the kings of Israel. And it never ran out.
So a finite resource with an infinite duration.
Exactly. Now think about the parallel. The 12 apostles are a finite group of men, a specific, closed group. You can't add a 13th. But their anointing, their message, their authority, their legal mandate becomes perpetual.
Through the Holy Spirit.
The idea is that just as the 12 logs of oil anointed the kings and priests throughout Israel's history, the 12 apostles are the source of the anointing for the new kingdom, and it lasts forever.
That is a beautiful parallel. And then there is the connection to the 12 spies. How does that work?
This is from Tractate Sanhedrin, page 2a. The rabbis are having a legal debate. What constitutes a congregation? In Hebrew, an AIUTA. How many men do you need to have a legal quorum for certain prayers or legal acts?
Like a minyan, which is 10 men today.
Exactly. And they derived that number of 10 from the story of the 12 spies that Moses sent into the land of Canaan. 10 of those spies came back and brought a bad, faithless report. The Bible calls that group of 10 an evil congregation. So the rabbis deduce from this that the minimum number for a congregation is 10.
So the number 12 is fundamentally linked to the very definition of the community itself.
And then Tractate Chagiga 12b goes fully cosmic with it. It states that the world itself rests on 12 pillars.
So to synthesize this, Jesus choosing 12 wasn't just a sentimental or aesthetic choice. It was a deeply legal act. He was establishing a quorum for judgment and a foundation for a new society.
He was building a new world, and he's building it literally on 12 pillars. Okay,
now we have to play devil's advocate for a minute and address the skeptics. Because we are leaning heavily on the Talmud, the Mishnah. And these were written down around 200 AD, or in the case of the Talmud, much later.
Right. Jesus lived and died in the 30s AD.
So can we really use a text from the year 200 to explain what happened in the year 30? It feels anachronistic.
It is a fair and important question, and it is one that critical scholars ask all the time. But the defense for using these sources is actually very solid.
So how do we bridge that 170-year gap?
First, we have to understand what the mission is. It wasn't written in 200 AD in the sense of being invented then. It was compiled and edited then. You should think of it as an archive of controversies.
So it is a record of debates that had already been going on for centuries.
Exactly. It explicitly records the legal disputes of Hillel and Shammai, the two great Pharisee sages who lived and taught before Jesus was even born. It preserves the oral traditions of the Second Temple period. So when we read the Mishnah, we are often hearing the direct echoes of the very conversations that were happening in the courtyards of the Jerusalem temple while Jesus was walking there.
And we actually have hard physical proof of this antiquity now, don't we?
We do. And that is the miracle of the Dead Sea Scrolls.
Carbon dating?
The scrolls were carbon dated conclusively to the time of Jesus, or in many cases, a century or two before. And what do we find in them? We find the same intense discussions about the 12, about the Sons of Light, about the Messianic Wars, about the strict interpretation of Sabbath law.
So the scrolls prove that these ideas weren't just invented by some rabbis in 200 AD to make sense of the past.
No, they prove that these ideas were the cultural and intellectual air they breathed in the first century.
They are the live issues of the day.
Precisely. That is why scholars like the late Jacob Neusner and David Flusser have argued so passionately that the Gospels are fundamentally unintelligible without the rabbinic context. If you don't know the Halakha, you miss the punchline of almost every story Jesus tells.
It's like trying to understand a political cartoon about the Supreme Court without knowing what the Constitution is. You see the picture, but you don't get the joke.
That is a perfect analogy. You missed the whole point.
Before we wrap this up, I want to quickly touch on the names themselves. The outline has this little teaser about some codes hidden in the names of the apostles.
Right, this is just a quick glimpse of how deep this rabbit hole goes. Take the brothers, James and John. Jesus gives them the Aramaic nickname Boanerges,
Which is translated as Sons of Thunder. I always just thought that meant they had bad tempers. You know, they were loud and boisterous guys.
That is the traditional Sunday school answer, and maybe it's partly true, but some scholars suggest it might be a geographical and intellectual reference to Bnei Brak.
Bnei Brak, the city in modern Israel.
Yes. In the first century, Bnei Brak was a famous center of rabbinic scholarship. It was where the legendary Rabbi Akiva would later teach. The suggestion is that to be a son of Bnei Brak, or to be associated with that region, might have been shorthand for flashes of intellect or thunderous Torah debates.
So Sons of Thunder might not mean sons of anger, but the intellectual heavyweights.
It's a possibility that fits the broader picture we've been painting. And look at the name Alpheo. He was the father of James the Less and also Levi, who is Matthew. The Hebrew root Aleph Lamed Peh can mean to change, to turn, or even to teach or learn. It was a root deeply linked to the transmission of tradition.
So these weren't just random names picked out of a hat. These were men who were embedded in the social and religious fabric of their time.
They were figures with lineages, with connections, with reputations, all deeply woven into the complex tapestry of first-century Judea.
Okay, so let's bring this all together. Where does this leave us? We started this deep dive with the familiar image of the bumbling fisherman.
The malevolent legend, as our source calls it.
And we have ended up with something that looks a lot more like a high court.
A Sanhedrin in exile, ready to become the new establishment.
Let's try to summarize. This legend of the ignorant apostles, it served a purpose, didn't it? It wasn't just an accident.
No, it served a very important purpose historically. It served to disconnect Christianity from its deep Jewish roots. If the apostles are just simple folk who know nothing about law or tradition, then you don't have to worry about the Torah. You can dismiss the entire Jewish context as something that was transcended.
Makes Christianity safe for a later Gentile audience that doesn't want to deal with the complexities of halakha.
Exactly. But when we replace that image, when we replace the bumbling fisherman with the image of the Shaliah, the bold, legally empowered agent, the whole story changes.
How so?
We see men trained by a master rabbi. Men who stood fearless before the corrupt, wealthy, violent political priests of Jerusalem and essentially said, "Your authority is void. Ours is valid."
It transforms the New Testament from a collection of cherished memories into something more like a set of legal precedents.
And that is the final provocative thought I would want to leave you with. If the apostles were actually a new high court, a new Sanhedrin designed to outlast the physical temple, which they did, what does that mean for their writings today?
The epistles, the Gospels themselves.
They aren't just well-meaning advice. They aren't just spiritual thoughts. In this framework, they are gezero. They are binding legal decrees for the kingdom. They are the case law of the new covenant.
That is a very heavy thought. It gives a whole new weight and authority to the text.
It requires us to read the text with Hebrew eyes, to see the law that structures the love and the love that fulfills the law.
Well, I can safely say I don't think I will ever look at a Renaissance painting of the apostles the same way again. I hope you won't either. Thank you for diving deep with us today.
It was a pleasure.
Until next time, keep digging.